Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber, joined here on set by Bob Hille. We also have Judge Ashley Willcott joining us. Big day here on the network. We're going to be live in one of our major trials, and we have to recap the conclusion of another trial that we covered here on the network. So let's get started right now. Next, we have a verdict for you in the trial of Kemia Hassel out of Michigan. Hassel is charged with first-degree premeditated murder and conspiracy to commit murder in connection with the death of her late husband, Sergeant Tyrone Hassel III, who was gunned down on New Year's Eve in 2018. The state argued that the defendant hatched this plot with her lover, Jeremy Cuellar, a soldier who was also stationed with the victim and the defendant, and who the state says is the actual shooter. His trial is scheduled for August. Now, what would be the motive? Well, that not only did the defendants want to continue on with their affair in peace, but that they had a lot to gain financially, specifically to get a hold of Tyrone's $400,000 life insurance payout. The defense, they were working on casting the blame away from their client and instead pointing the finger directly at Cuellar. They highlighted that the prosecution's case was mostly speculation and that Kemia was coerced into confessing to detectives. Now, before the jurors came back with their verdict, they requested more information regarding the retrieval of the Snapchat data. As you may recall from this case, it was alleged that the defendants were plotting this murder through Snapchat messaging, and that Kemia intentionally deleted her account afterwards. Well, after less than an hour of deliberation, here was the jury's verdict. Guilty across the board. That carries with it a mandatory life in prison without the possibility of parole. She will be sentenced on August 29th. Let's break it down. Bob, were you surprised by this?
Not really. The evidence here is pretty strong. The defense was sort of a Hail Mary defense about, this guy was so bent on killing this person so he could have his wife that somehow, no matter what she said or did, really played no role. It's almost like in a civil case we have proximate cause. There's no proximate cause here because she should be severed from this. He acted really alone without any influence from her. But obviously the jury didn't buy that.
Well, let's talk about him for a second. Joining me as well is juvenile judge and trial attorney Judge Ashley Willcott. Welcome to the program. Good morning, Judge. What a case to follow. What is this verdict? How is this going to impact the trial of Cuellar?
Well, yeah, it is going to impact the trial. I don't know. There's a part of me that wonders, are we going to see a plea based on this? Because, again, like you pointed out, to deliberate for under an hour, I think the evidence, quite frankly, was damning. I think the deletion of the Snapchat really made a significant difference to the jury, most likely. So are we going to see a plea possibly before the start of trial, which is always a legal option? I would consider discussing that with prosecution if they're willing to offer anything if I were his attorney.
Well, I got to tell you, we saw a pretty strong case against him in this trial. They were laying out the facts that they have against him, that he's the shooter. It's a pretty strong case. And I mean, the prosecution presented a very strong argument, especially in their closing argument, which is what we want to go to now. This is from yesterday. Take a look. You know, Bob, we hear this term a lot. And the idea is that a false confession, a coerced confession, what's the law on that?
And I'm not sure what the law is over there in Michigan on this, but generally you look at the circumstances of a confession, whether someone was really exerting their own free will, whether they were properly advised their rights going in. But the problem is, I think, in a case like this, is the confession's already come in. So the jurors are already considering, the lawyers probably fought over this, and the court ruled to allow it to come in. So a lot of those things that we hear about in terms of coerced confessions have already been addressed, and it's coming in for their consideration.
Right.
So now, the best thing the lawyer can do is to really challenge it and say, it doesn't match up with the facts, because now you're attacking the credibility of the confession, but not the legality of it. And so what happens ultimately is the jurors can consider, well, do the facts match up? If there's too many coincidences like there were here, and it was too many consistent with circumstantial evidence, they buy it.
Judge, it'd be one thing if the jury only had that confession to look at, but then they also heard this secret jailhouse recording with her mother where she confesses. Was that coerced?
Well, exactly. I would argue it wasn't coerced, just as if I don't believe the first confession was coerced. And so defense tried to argue a little bit differently and say, well, it was manipulation. But just like you pointed out, is it really manipulation when you confess to your mother on quite frankly, on a phone that you should probably assume or think that might be recorded? So I don't think it's coercion or manipulation.
Judge, one quick follow-up question with you. Her sentencing is going to be, I think, August 29th. The question, of course, is Is this a mandatory life in prison without the possibility of parole? I mean, why was she just not sentenced on the spot right there? Is there something to be considered? Are there victim impact statements that need to be prepared? I mean, why are we having a sentencing date pushed back after she was just convicted of these crimes?
You know, to be quite honest, as a judge, I can tell you our calendars are full. And so frequently it may be simply the scheduling of the court, the available court dates. Often you do want to give defense and prosecution time to prepare just what you said. Any statements that are going to be presented, any testimony, give them an opportunity if there's any additional research they want to do prior to sentencing. So it's not atypical, at least in this part of the world, to allow some time before it can be set back down on the calendar.
But Bob, is there anything the defense could realistically do to get her some sort of leniency here?
I mean, there are probably going to be post-trial motions. And again, as the judge pointed out, it's really judicial discretion. This person is an inmate now. They're not getting out. So the community doesn't have that risk. And the judge probably put it on the schedule to allow the parties to address any sentencing issues, but also post-trial motions that they may want to raise. I'm sure there were a lot of things off or outside the presence of the jury that the court has to address.
Well, you could argue that it was a tough case for the defense, and we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to hear the defense's arguments and see how did they do. We'll be right back right after this.